The morning sun cast golden rays across the cobblestone streets of London as thousands of people lined up along the parade route. Everyone had arrived early, some as early as dawn, to secure the best viewing spots for the annual royal parade. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. Elderly couples held hands on folding chairs, and tourists from around the world raised their cameras high, eager to capture a glimpse of royalty. Among the massive crowd stood 9-year-old Emma Harrison, a small girl with bright green eyes and auburn hair tied in 2 neat braids. She stood between her mother, Sarah, and her younger brother, Tommy, who was only 5. The family had traveled from their small village in the countryside, a 3-hour journey just to witness this spectacular event. Emma had been talking about nothing else for weeks. Emma's mother had dressed her in a pretty blue dress with white flowers, the same dress Emma had worn to her school's spring concert. Tommy wore his favorite shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it, though he had already managed to get a chocolate stain on the collar from the snack their mother had packed. Sarah Harrison looked tired but happy, her camera hanging around her neck ready to capture the memories. The street was decorated magnificently. Red, white, and blue banners hung from every lamppost and building. Union Jack flags waved in the gentle breeze. Street vendors sold commemorative items, balloons, and snacks. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Everyone was chatting excitedly, sharing stories of previous parades they had attended, or discussing the members of the royal family they hoped to see. Emma had studied everything about the Royal Guard in the weeks leading up to this day. She knew about their distinctive red tunics and tall bearskin hats. She had learned that they were not just ceremonial soldiers, but highly trained military personnel who took their duty very seriously. Her father, who couldn't make the trip because of work, had told her stories about the guards and their unwavering dedication to protecting the royal family. As the clock tower in the distance chimed 10 times, a hush began to fall over the crowd. Police officers in bright yellow vests walked along the barriers making final checks. Mounted police on beautiful horses positioned themselves at intervals along the route. The parade was about to begin. Emma felt her heart racing with excitement. She squeezed between 2 adults to get a better view, pressing her small body against the metal barrier that separated the crowd from the street. Her mother kept a protective hand on her shoulder, making sure she was safe in the pressing crowd. The sound of drums echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. Then came the brass instruments playing a traditional military march that made Emma's chest swell with emotion. The first row of guards appeared around the corner, marching in perfect synchronization. Their boots hit the pavement with precision, creating a rhythmic sound that seemed to make the entire street vibrate. Emma watched in awe as row after row of guards marched past. Their faces were stern and focused, looking straight ahead, never breaking their concentration. Behind them came the cavalry, horses with shining coats stepping proudly, their riders sitting tall and dignified. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, cameras clicking frantically, trying to capture every moment. Then Emma saw him. About 50 meters down the street, marching in the 3rd row of guards, was a soldier who immediately caught her attention. He was tall and stood out even among the other impressive guardsmen. There was something about his bearing, the way he carried himself, that seemed different from the others. Emma couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to watch him specifically. As the parade continued, Emma noticed something that others seemed to miss. While all the other guards maintained their rigid, forward-facing posture, this particular guard's eyes moved almost imperceptibly. He wasn't breaking his stance, but Emma could tell he was observing everything around him with intense focus. His gaze swept across the crowd, not in a casual way, but with the alertness of someone looking for potential threats. Emma had read in one of her library books that the royal guards were trained to spot danger, even while maintaining their ceremonial duties. This guard seemed to embody that training perfectly. She watched as his eyes paused briefly on different sections of the crowd, assessing, analyzing, protecting. The royal carriages were approaching now, and the crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch. People pushed forward, trying to get a better view. Emma felt herself being pressed harder against the barrier, her mother's grip on her shoulder tightening. Tommy was crying because someone had stepped on his foot, and Sarah was trying to comfort him while also trying to see over the taller people in front of them. It was in this moment of chaos and excitement that Emma noticed something truly alarming. About 20 meters to her left, past several rows of excited spectators, she saw a man behaving strangely. He was tall and wore a dark jacket despite the warm weather. While everyone else was smiling, waving, and taking photos, this man stood perfectly still, his hand inside his jacket, his face serious and focused. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had watched enough news programs with her parents to understand that sometimes bad people tried to hurt others at big public events. The way this man stood, the way he kept his hand hidden, the intense expression on his face. Everything about him seemed wrong. She looked around frantically for a police officer, but they were all facing the street, watching the parade, managing the crowd from behind. She tried to tell her mother, tugging on her sleeve. But Sarah was busy consoling Tommy and couldn't hear Emma's small voice over the noise of the crowd and the music of the marching band. The guard she had been watching was getting closer now, marching steadily down the street. Emma realized that in just moments he would pass by her position and continue on, and then it would be too late to do anything. Her heart pounded in her chest. She knew she had to act, but she was just a little girl. Who would listen to her? How could she possibly stop an entire royal parade? Emma's mind raced, remembering everything she had learned about the royal guards and their training. Then she remembered something crucial from one of her books. Our guards were trained to recognize specific signals, ways that people in distress could communicate danger without causing panic. The book had mentioned historical emergency signals that dated back decades, still part of their training even in modern times. She took a deep breath, her small hands gripping the cold metal barrier. The suspicious man was still standing there, still with his hand inside his jacket. The royal carriages were getting closer. The guard she had been watching was now only about 10 meters away. Emma knew this was her only chance. Her hands began to move, forming the signal she had memorized from her book, hoping desperately that this guard would see it, recognize it, and understand that something was terribly wrong. Emma raised her right hand slowly, keeping her left hand gripped on the barrier for support. Her small fingers formed a specific pattern that she had studied carefully in the library book about royal protocols and emergency procedures. She held her fist closed with her thumb trapped inside, then made a subtle downward motion twice, the old distress signal that meant immediate danger. Her heart hammered so hard she thought everyone around her could hear it. The guard was now just 5 meters away, his boots striking the pavement in perfect rhythm with his fellow soldiers. Emma held the signal steady, her eyes locked on him, silently pleading for him to notice her among the thousands of faces. Her arm was beginning to tire, but she didn't dare lower it or change position. For a moment, nothing happened. The guard continued marching, his face maintaining that same stern ceremonial expression. Emma felt tears beginning to well up in her eyes. Maybe the book had been wrong. Maybe that signal wasn't used anymore. Maybe she had remembered it incorrectly. The world seemed to slow down around her as doubt crept into her mind. Then, so subtly that Emma almost missed it, the guard's eyes shifted. Just a fraction of movement, breaking from his forward stare to glance in her direction. His gaze landed on her raised hand, on the signal she was holding, and Emma saw something change in his expression. It wasn't a big change. His face remained professionally neutral, but his eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and his jaw tightened. The guard's name was Sergeant James Mitchell, a decorated soldier with 15 years of service in the Royal Guard. He had served in active combat zones, had received commendations for bravery, and had been specifically selected for today's parade duty because of his exceptional record and sharp instincts. When he spotted Emma's signal, every alarm in his well-trained mind went off instantly. Mitchell knew that signal. It had been drilled into him during his training years ago, part of the historical protocols that every guard learned. It was rarely used, almost never seen in modern times, but its meaning was crystal clear. Imminent threat, immediate danger, possible attack. The fact that a young girl was making this signal was unusual, but Mitchell's training taught him never to ignore any potential warning, no matter the source. Without breaking his march or his posture, Mitchell activated the tiny communication device hidden in his collar. In a voice so low that even the guards beside him couldn't hear, he spoke urgently to the command center. His words were quick and precise, indicating his position, describing what he had seen, and requesting immediate assessment of the situation. Meanwhile, Emma continued to hold her signal, but now she raised her other hand and pointed discreetly toward the suspicious man in the dark jacket. She tried to make her gesture as obvious as possible without causing panic among the people around her. Her mother was still distracted with Tommy, who had finally stopped crying but was now asking for another snack. Mitchell followed Emma's pointing finger with his eyes, never turning his head, using only his peripheral vision and quick glances. He spotted the man immediately. Even from a distance, Mitchell could see what Emma had seen. The rigid posture, the hand inside the jacket, the intense focus that differed from the excited energy of everyone else in the crowd. Mitchell's combat experience made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This wasn't right. Speaking again into his hidden microphone, Mitchell provided details about the suspicious individual's location, appearance, and behavior. In the command center several blocks away, officers were already reviewing security camera feeds, zooming in on the man Emma had identified. Additional plainclothes security personnel in the crowd began moving discreetly toward that location. But the royal carriages were approaching fast. Protocol demanded extreme caution when the royal family was in close proximity to any potential threat. Mitchell made a split-second decision that would either be praised as heroic or criticized as an overreaction. He couldn't take the risk of being wrong. In one smooth motion, breaking from his mechanical march, Mitchell raised his right arm and made a sharp, definitive gesture, the signal to halt the parade. It was a command that held absolute authority. When a guard on active duty made that signal, everything stopped, no questions asked. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The entire parade ground to a halt. Drums stopped mid-beat. Horses pulled up short, their training keeping them calm despite the unexpected command. The other guards froze in position, hands moving subtly toward their weapons. The royal carriages, still about 40 meters behind Mitchell's position, stopped immediately, their drivers well trained in emergency procedures. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. People looked around, uncertain what was happening. Some thought it was part of the ceremony. Others began to sense that something was wrong. Camera crews broadcasting the event live tried to determine what had caused the sudden stop. Commentators fumbled for explanations. Emma felt her mother's hand grip her shoulder tighter. Sarah Harrison had finally noticed that something unusual was happening, and her maternal instinct made her pull both her children closer to her. Tommy asked in his small voice what was going on, but Sarah shushed him gently, her eyes scanning the scene. Trying to understand, Mitchell remained in position, but his stance had shifted from ceremonial to combat-ready. Other guards around him had subtly changed their posture too, their years of training kicking in automatically. They didn't know what the threat was yet, but they trusted Mitchell's judgment completely. If he had stopped the parade, there was a reason. Plainclothes security officers had now converged on the suspicious man's location. They approached from multiple angles, moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Emma watched as 4 officers surrounded the man, their movements quick but controlled. The man seemed startled, his hand starting to pull from his jacket, but the officers were faster. They grabbed his arms, securing him before he could react. The crowd around the man erupted in shouts and screams. People pushed backward, creating a circle of space. Parents grabbed their children. Some people ducked down, afraid of what might happen next. Police officers in yellow vests rushed to control the situation, urging people to remain calm, clearing the area around where the man had been standing. From her position, Emma couldn't see exactly what was happening in the commotion, but she could see the officers holding the man, searching him, examining his jacket. More security personnel had arrived, creating a perimeter. The entire mood of the parade had shifted from celebration to tension in just seconds. Mitchell finally allowed himself to look directly at Emma. Their eyes met across the distance, and he gave her the smallest of nods, a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude. Emma felt tears rolling down her cheeks now, tears of relief and residual fear. Her whole body was shaking. Sarah Harrison had finally pieced together what had happened. She looked down at her daughter, seeing the tears, the trembling hands, the expression of someone who had just experienced something intense and frightening. She knelt down, wrapping Emma in her arms, whispering questions, trying to understand what her daughter had done. Through her tears, Emma tried to explain. She told her mother about the strange man, about the signal she had made, about how she had just known something was wrong. Sarah held her tighter, amazed and frightened by her daughter's bravery and the danger they had all been in without knowing it. The security officers were now escorting the detained man away from the crowd, moving him behind the barriers and toward a waiting police vehicle. Commands were being shouted. Radio chatter filled the air. The casual, celebratory atmosphere of the parade had been completely transformed into a scene of serious security operations. In the royal carriages, members of the royal family remained calm, their security detail surrounding them protectively. They had been trained for situations exactly like this, though they occurred rarely. The most important thing now was to ensure their safety and determine the full extent of the threat. The command center, located in a secure facility 3 blocks from the parade route, had erupted into controlled chaos. Multiple screens displayed camera feeds from every angle of the parade route. Security officials in dark suits spoke rapidly into headsets, coordinating responses, analyzing the situation, and making critical decisions about how to proceed. The head of security, Commander Patricia Reynolds, stood at the center of it all, her face stern as she processed incoming information. On one of the main screens, footage showed the detained man being searched by officers. Within moments, a report came through that made everyone in the room tense. The man had been carrying something in his jacket, though it wasn't immediately clear what it was. The security team on the ground was being extremely cautious, treating the situation as potentially dangerous until they could be certain of what they were dealing with. Back at the parade route, Mitchell remained at attention, though he could hear the communications flowing through his earpiece. Other senior guards had joined him, forming a protective formation. Behind them, additional security personnel had created a wider perimeter around the royal carriages. The royal family would not be moved until the situation was fully assessed and declared safe. Emma clung to her mother, watching as the scene continued to unfold. Other families near them were asking questions, trying to understand what had happened. Some people were filming on their phones, capturing the dramatic interruption of the parade. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras broadcasting the scene to millions of viewers watching from home. A senior police officer, Inspector David Thornton, began making his way through the crowd toward Emma's position. He had received a radio communication from the security team, describing how the threat had been identified by a young girl using an old emergency signal. Thornton, a veteran of 30 years on the force, had never encountered such a situation. He needed to speak with this girl immediately to understand exactly what she had seen. Sarah Harrison noticed the officer approaching, his presence commanding even in the confused crowd. Her protective instinct made her hold Emma even tighter, uncertain what would happen next. Thornton reached the barrier and spoke in a calm, professional voice, asking to speak with the young girl who had made the signal. His tone was kind but serious, making it clear this was important. With trembling legs, Emma stepped forward, still holding her mother's hand. She looked up at the tall officer, her green eyes still wet with tears. Tommy clung to his mother's other side, confused and scared by everything happening around them. Thornton knelt down to be at Emma's eye level, his weathered face softening as he looked at the frightened child. He asked Emma to tell him everything she had seen, from the very beginning. Emma took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice quiet at first but growing stronger as she went on. She described how she had noticed the man standing oddly still while everyone else was excited and moving. She explained how his hand was inside his jacket, and how his face looked serious and focused in a way that scared her. She told the inspector about trying to get her mother's attention, but being unable to because of the noise in the crowd. Then Emma explained how she had remembered the emergency signal from the library book she had read about the Royal Guard. She described making the signal and how the guard had seen it and understood. Thornton listened carefully to every word, occasionally asking gentle questions to clarify details. Other officers had gathered nearby, listening to this remarkable story. Thornton spoke into his radio, relaying Emma's account to the command center. Commander Reynolds listened intently, cross-referencing Emma's description with what her security team had observed. Everything matched perfectly. The girl's awareness and quick thinking had potentially prevented something terrible. Meanwhile, the examination of the detained man and his belongings was proceeding carefully at a secure location nearby. Bomb disposal experts had been called in as a precaution. The man himself was being questioned by specialized interrogators. Initial reports suggested he might have mental health issues, But the security team was taking no chances until they understood his intentions completely. Mitchell had been given permission to briefly step out of formation. He walked over to where Emma stood with her family and the police officers. As he approached, the crowd near them fell silent, sensing something significant was happening. Mitchell stopped in front of Emma and removed his tall bearskin hat, a gesture of respect that was rarely seen from a guard on duty. He looked down at the small girl who had shown such extraordinary courage and awareness. In his deep voice, Mitchell thanked Emma for her sharp eyes and her brave action. He explained that her signal had been clear and correct, exactly as it should have been done. He told her that she might have saved many lives today, including members of the royal family. Emma felt overwhelmed by his words. She hadn't thought of herself as brave. She had simply seen something wrong and tried to do something about it. Tears began flowing again, but these were different tears, and tears of relief, of understanding the magnitude of what had happened, of processing the intense emotions of the last 20 minutes. Sarah Harrison was crying too, holding her daughter and thanking Mitchell repeatedly. She couldn't believe what her little girl had done, how she had recognized danger that hundreds of adults had missed, how she had known what to do in a critical moment. Tommy asked if his sister was a hero now, his innocent question making several of the serious officers smile despite the tense situation. Commander Reynolds herself arrived at the scene minutes later, having left the command center to personally meet the girl who had initiated this emergency response. Reynolds was a formidable woman, respected throughout the security services for her competence and cool-headedness under pressure. She approached Emma with several other high-ranking officials. Reynolds knelt down just as Inspector Thornton had done and looked Emma in the eyes. She spoke clearly and seriously, telling Emma that what she had done was extraordinary. Reynolds explained that most adults would not have noticed what Emma noticed, and even fewer would have known how to communicate the danger effectively. She said that Emma's actions demonstrated remarkable awareness and courage. The commander asked Emma about the book she had read, wanting to know where a 9-year-old girl had learned about historical Royal Guard emergency signals. Emma explained about her weekly visits to the village library, about how she loved reading books about history and the royal family, about how she had been so excited about the parade that she had read everything she could find about the guards and their traditions. Reynolds was impressed. She made a mental note to have her training team review whether these historical signals should be more widely publicized or kept as they were. The fact that this signal was not commonly known had actually worked in their favor today. Someone with malicious intent wouldn't have expected a member of the public to use it. The radio communication crackled with an update from the team examining the detained man. The news made Reynolds' expression tighten. The man had indeed been carrying something dangerous in his jacket. A homemade device that, while crude, could have caused significant harm if deployed in the crowded area. The man was clearly troubled, and initial questioning suggested he had fixated on the royal family due to delusional beliefs stemming from untreated mental illness. Reynolds stood up, speaking quietly to her team, making decisions about how to proceed. The threat had been neutralized, but the parade could not continue as planned. The royal family would need to be transported safely away from the area. The crowds would need to be dispersed carefully to avoid panic. It would take hours to secure everything properly. The decision was made to conclude the parade early and transport the royal family back to the palace through a secure alternate route. Announcements were being prepared to inform the public about what had happened, carefully worded to avoid causing panic while still acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. Media representatives were already requesting information, their cameras capturing every moment of the unprecedented scene. Emma and her family were asked to move to a secure area away from the main crowd. Several officers formed a protective circle around them as they were guided through the barriers and behind the official parade zone. Sarah kept both her children close, still processing the fact that her daughter had just prevented a potential attack on the royal family. Tommy complained about missing the rest of the parade, not fully understanding the gravity of what his sister had done. They were brought to a tent that had been set up as a coordination center for parade officials. Inside, Emma was given water and a chair to sit in. A kind female officer stayed with the family, explaining what would happen next. They would need to provide official statements about what they had witnessed. Emma's account would be especially important for the investigation into the detained man and his intentions. Mitchell arrived at the tent shortly after, having been temporarily relieved of his ceremonial duties given his central role in the incident. He still wore his red tunic, but had removed the heavy bearskin hat. Despite his imposing physical presence, his demeanor toward Emma was gentle and kind. He sat down across from her, wanting to explain something important. He told Emma that what she had done required not just knowledge but also courage. Many people might have noticed something suspicious but talked themselves out of acting, afraid of being wrong or causing trouble. Mitchell explained that in his 15 years of service, he had seen highly trained soldiers hesitate in critical moments. The fact that a 9-year-old girl had the presence of mind and the bravery to take action was genuinely remarkable. Emma asked Mitchell what would have happened if she hadn't signaled him. Mitchell paused, choosing his words carefully. He explained that the security services had many layers of protection in place, but the man had positioned himself in a blind spot, an area where he might not have been noticed until it was too late. Emma's early warning had given them precious time to respond before the royal carriages reached that location. Sarah Harrison listened to this explanation with growing emotion. The reality of how close they had all been to danger was overwhelming. She thought about all the other families in the crowd, about her own children who had been standing just meters away from someone carrying a dangerous device. She held Emma's hand tightly, feeling an intense mixture of pride and residual fear. Inspector Thornton entered the tent with a tablet computer in his hand. He explained that Emma would need to provide a formal statement, but he wanted to make the process as comfortable as possible for her. He would ask questions, and she should answer in her own words, taking her time. Everything she said would be recorded and used in the investigation. Emma nodded, sitting up straighter in her chair. She was tired, emotionally drained, but she understood this was important. For the next hour, she answered questions, describing everything she had seen in detail. Thornton was patient and thorough, occasionally asking her to clarify specific points. Mitchell stayed in the tent during the interview, his presence seeming to give Emma confidence. She described the man's appearance, his clothing, his position in the crowd. She explained exactly how she had noticed him, what specifically had seemed wrong about his behavior. She demonstrated the signal she had made and explained where she had learned it. Thornton was impressed by how clear and detailed her recollections were. Despite her young age, Emma was proving to be an excellent witness. While Emma was being interviewed, decisions were being made at the highest levels of government and the royal household about how to respond to this incident. The Prime Minister had been briefed and was being kept updated on the investigation. Members of the royal family, safe in the palace now, had been told about the young girl who had potentially saved their lives. They wanted to meet her, to thank her personally. Commander Reynolds returned to the tent after speaking with her superiors. She approached Sarah Harrison and explained that there would be significant media interest in this story. Emma's actions had been captured on multiple cameras, and news organizations around the world were already reporting on the dramatic halt of the royal parade. Reynolds asked how the family felt about this attention. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the question. She hadn't thought about media attention or publicity. She just wanted to take her children home, to process what had happened in the safety and quiet of their small village. But she also understood that this story was bigger than her family now. Emma had done something extraordinary, and people would want to know about it. Reynolds explained that the family had options. They could choose to remain anonymous, with official statements making no mention of Emma's name or identifying details. Or they could choose to come forward publicly, which would mean interviews, photographs, and significant attention. Reynolds made it clear there was no pressure either way. The choice was entirely theirs. Emma surprised everyone by speaking up. In her small but clear voice, she said she thought other people should know about the emergency signal. If she had learned it from a library book, maybe other children could learn it too. Maybe if more people knew how to communicate danger, it could help keep everyone safer. Her reasoning was simple but profound, and it made the adults in the tent look at each other with new respect for this remarkable child. Mitchell smiled at Emma's response. He thought about all the complicated tactical discussions and security protocols that filled his professional life, and here was a 9-year-old girl cutting straight to the heart of what mattered, keeping people safe. He told Emma that she was absolutely right, and that her idea might lead to changes in how security awareness was taught to the public. As the afternoon wore on, the investigation into the detained man continued. Psychiatrists were evaluating him, trying to understand his mental state and his intentions. His background was being thoroughly examined. The device he had been carrying was being analyzed by experts. Every aspect of how he had gotten to the parade route, how he had evaded initial security screening, was being scrutinized to identify failures in the system. What was becoming clear was that the man had been clever despite his mental illness. He had chosen his position carefully, had dressed to blend in with the crowd, had timed his actions to coincide with the moment when the royal carriages would be passing. If not for Emma's observation, he would likely have succeeded in causing harm. News broadcasts that evening featured extensive coverage of the halted parade. Security experts were interviewed, discussing the incident and praising the response of the Royal Guard and police. Speculation ran wild about what exactly had been prevented. The government would not release specific details about the threat for security reasons, but they confirmed that a dangerous individual had been detained and that a potential attack had been stopped. Emma's name had not been released, but the story of a young girl using a historical emergency signal was already spreading. Social media buzzed with people trying to figure out what the signal was, sharing theories and historical information about Royal Guard protocols. The library book that Emma had read was suddenly being requested by dozens of people wanting to learn the same information she had learned. Back in the tent, Emma had finally finished giving her statement. She was exhausted, leaning against her mother, her eyes heavy with tiredness. Tommy had fallen asleep on a couch in the corner, worn out by the excitement and confusion of the day. Sarah stroked Emma's hair gently, whispering how proud she was, how brave Emma had been. Reynolds approached one final time before the family would be allowed to leave. She explained that transportation had been arranged to take them back to their village safely. Security officers would accompany them to ensure they arrived home without any problems. She also mentioned that Emma would be receiving official recognition for her actions, though the details were still being finalized. The drive back to their village took place in a police vehicle with tinted windows, escorted by 2 additional unmarked cars. Emma pressed her face against the window, watching the countryside roll by as they left London behind. The events of the day played over and over in her mind like a movie she couldn't stop watching. She kept thinking about the man with his hand in his jacket, about the moment she had made the signal, about the guard's face when he had seen her. Sarah sat quietly, her arm around Emma, occasionally glancing down at her daughter with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name, pride certainly, but also a deep gratitude that nothing terrible had happened. She thought about how differently this day could have ended, about all the families at the parade who had no idea how close they had come to tragedy. Tommy woke up confused when they were about halfway home. He asked if they could go back to see the parade tomorrow, not understanding that there wouldn't be another parade, that this had been a once-a-year event. Sarah explained gently that they would talk about it more later, and Tommy, still drowsy, accepted this and dozed off again. When they finally arrived in their small village just after 8 in the evening, the sun was setting, casting orange light across the familiar streets. The police officers helped them out of the vehicle and ensured they were safely inside their house before departing. Sarah locked the door behind them and finally allowed herself to breathe fully, to release the tension she had been holding all day. Their father, Robert Harrison, had been following the news from work and had rushed home as soon as he could. When he burst through the door and saw his family safe, tears streamed down his face. He scooped Emma up in his arms, holding her tightly, telling her how scared he had been when he heard what happened, how proud he was of her bravery. Emma cried too, finally allowing herself to release all the emotions she had been holding inside. That evening, after Tommy was put to bed with promises that they would explain everything better tomorrow, Emma sat with her parents at the kitchen table. Robert had made hot chocolate, Emma's favorite, and they talked about the day. Emma asked questions that had been bothering her. What would happen to the man who had been arrested? Why had he wanted to hurt people? Why did some people do bad things? Robert and Sarah did their best to answer honestly but appropriately for their 9-year-old daughter. They explained that sometimes people became very sick in their minds, and when that happened, they might do things that didn't make sense to others. They assured Emma that the man would get help now, and that he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone. They emphasized that what Emma had done was about protecting people, not about judging the man. Emma seemed satisfied with these answers. She mentioned what she had said earlier about other people learning the emergency signal. She suggested that maybe her school could teach it to the other students, that maybe it could be part of what everyone learned about staying safe. Robert and Sarah looked at each other, recognizing the wisdom in their daughter's words. The next morning, Emma woke to find her village transformed. News vans were parked on their street, reporters were standing outside their house, and neighbors were gathering curiously. The story had broken overnight, and somehow Emma's identity had been discovered. Sarah looked out the window with dismay, unsure how to handle this invasion of their privacy. Inspector Thornton called their home phone, apologizing for the media circus. He explained that despite their best efforts to keep Emma's identity confidential, information had leaked. He offered to send officers to help manage the reporters and protect the family's privacy. He also mentioned that several official requests had come in for Emma to be interviewed, including from major news programs. Robert answered these calls while Sarah tried to maintain some normalcy for the children. Emma seemed less bothered by the attention than her parents were. She kept thinking about what she had said about other people learning the signal, and she wondered if talking to the news might help spread that message. When Emma suggested this to her parents, they were hesitant. They wanted to protect her from being overwhelmed by attention, from becoming some kind of celebrity child. But Emma's reasoning was simple and sincere. If talking about what happened could help other people learn how to stay safe, wasn't that a good thing? After much discussion, the Harrison family agreed to do one television interview with a reputable news program, with a condition that it would focus on safety awareness and not sensationalize Emma's actions. They wanted to control the narrative as much as possible and prevent their daughter from being exploited. The interview was scheduled for 2 days later, giving the family time to prepare and allowing the initial media frenzy to calm down slightly. In the meantime, Emma returned to school, where she was greeted as a hero by her classmates. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had prepared the class carefully, explaining what Emma had done in age-appropriate terms and emphasizing the importance of staying aware of one's surroundings. Emma's best friend, Sophie, hugged her tightly and told her she was the bravest person Sophie knew. Other children asked questions, wanted to hear the story, asked to see the signal Emma had made. Mrs. Patterson allowed Emma to demonstrate the signal and explain what it meant, turning the situation into an impromptu safety lesson for the entire class. During lunch break, the school principal, Mr. Davies, spoke with Emma privately. He told her that the school was very proud of her and that her actions reflected the values they tried to teach all their students: gun awareness, courage, and responsibility. He mentioned that they were considering implementing a safety awareness program throughout the school, inspired by Emma's experience. On the day of the television interview, a crew came to the Harrison home rather than asking the family to travel to a studio. The interviewer, a well-known journalist named Margaret Collins, was professional and warm. She spent time with Emma before the cameras started rolling, explaining the process and making sure Emma felt comfortable. The interview itself lasted about 30 minutes, though only a portion would be broadcast. Margaret asked Emma to describe what she had seen at the parade, how she had known something was wrong, and where she had learned about the emergency signal. Emma answered clearly and thoughtfully, her natural intelligence and sincerity shining through. When Margaret asked Emma what she wanted people to learn from her experience, Emma's response was profound in its simplicity. She said that everyone should pay attention to what's happening around them, that sometimes something might not feel right and it's important to trust that feeling. She explained that knowing how to communicate danger without causing panic was useful, and that she thought everyone should learn at least one way to signal for help quietly. The interview concluded with Margaret asking Emma if she was afraid now, if this experience had made her scared of crowds or public events. Emma thought about this seriously before answering. She said that she wasn't more scared, but she was more aware. She understood that bad things could happen anywhere. But she also understood that there were people like Sergeant Mitchell and Commander Reynolds and Inspector Thornton who worked very hard to keep everyone safe. When the interview aired the following evening, millions of people watched. Emma's composed demeanor and thoughtful responses captured hearts across the nation. Her suggestion that safety signals should be more widely taught sparked serious discussions among security professionals and educators. Several schools announced they would be implementing safety awareness programs. Libraries reported increased interest in books about emergency procedures and royal history. 2 weeks after the parade incident, an official letter arrived at the Harrison home bearing the royal seal. Inside was a formal invitation for Emma and her family to visit the palace for a private audience with members of the royal family. The letter explained that the royal family wished to personally thank Emma for her actions and her courage. The date was set for the following Friday, and arrangements would be made for the family's transportation and accommodation. Emma read the invitation with wide eyes, barely able to believe what she was seeing. She had done what she did because it was the right thing, not because she expected any reward or recognition. The idea of actually meeting the royal family seemed surreal, like something from one of her storybooks rather than her real life. Sarah cried when she read the invitation, overwhelmed by the honor being bestowed on their family. Robert kept reading it over and over, making sure it was real. Even Tommy seemed to understand that something very special was happening, though he was most excited about the idea of seeing the palace's famous gardens that he had seen in picture books. The week leading up to the visit was filled with preparations. Emma needed a new dress for such a formal occasion, and the family took a special trip to a nearby town to find something appropriate. They settled on a beautiful emerald green dress that matched Emma's eyes, elegant but still appropriate for a child. Sarah and Robert also purchased new outfits, wanting to look their best for this extraordinary occasion. Emma's teacher gave her a special assignment to research the history of the palace and the royal family, so she would understand the significance of where she was going. Emma threw herself into this project, spending hours in the library learning about the monarchy's long history, about the palace's architecture and its role in British history. She made careful notes in a notebook, wanting to remember everything. On the morning of their visit, the Harrison family woke early. A car arrived to collect them, not a police vehicle this time, but an elegant official car with a driver in formal attire. The drive to London took several hours, during which Emma alternated between reading her notes and watching the scenery. Her stomach fluttered with nervous excitement. When they finally arrived at the palace gates, Emma pressed her face to the window, taking in the magnificent building with its grand facade and the guards standing at attention. The car was waved through security checkpoints and pulled up to a private entrance. A palace official, a kind older gentleman named Mr. Whitmore, greeted them warmly and escorted them inside. The interior of the palace was even more magnificent than Emma had imagined. Ornate chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Paintings of historical figures lined the walls, and everywhere she looked there were details of incredible beauty and craftsmanship. Mr. Whitmore led them through several corridors, explaining the history of different rooms they passed, clearly enjoying Emma's obvious fascination with everything she saw. They were brought to an elegant sitting room and asked to wait. Tea and biscuits were served by palace staff, and Emma tried to remember all the etiquette her mother had taught her about formal situations. Tommy was remarkably well behaved, perhaps sensing the importance of the occasion, though Sarah kept a careful eye on him to ensure he didn't touch anything valuable. Sergeant Mitchell appeared in the doorway, now dressed in a formal uniform rather than his ceremonial guard outfit. Emma's face lit up when she saw him, and he smiled warmly in return. He had been invited to the audience as well, given his crucial role in responding to Emma's signal. He sat down with the family, asking how they had been in the weeks since the incident, putting them at ease with his friendly manner. Then Mr. Whitmore returned and announced that the royal family was ready to receive them. Emma's heart began pounding as they were led to another, even more impressive room. Inside, standing ready to greet them, were several members of the royal family, including those who had been in the parade that day. The formal greetings were conducted with proper protocol, but there was genuine warmth in the royal family's welcome. They invited everyone to sit, creating an atmosphere that was respectful yet comfortable. The senior royal present spoke first, thanking Emma directly for her alertness and courage. The words were sincere, acknowledging that Emma's actions had potentially saved lives. Emma, who had practiced a small speech with her parents, found herself speaking naturally instead. She expressed her honor at meeting the royal family, and explained that she had simply done what she thought anyone should do when they saw something wrong. She mentioned her idea about teaching safety signals to more people, and the royal family members listened with genuine interest. One of the younger royals, closer to Emma's age, asked about the library book where Emma had learned the signal. This led to an animated discussion about books and reading, with Emma describing her favorite historical books and the young royal sharing recommendations. The formality of the occasion softened into a genuine conversation between families. The discussion turned to the broader implications of what had happened. The royal family explained that Emma's actions had prompted a comprehensive review of security protocols and public safety education. New programs were being developed to teach citizens, especially children, about safety awareness and emergency communication. Emma's suggestion was being taken seriously at the highest levels of government. Mitchell spoke about the incident from his perspective, describing the moment he had seen Emma's signal and his immediate reaction. He explained to the royal family how perfectly Emma had executed the distress signal, how clear and unmistakable it had been. He emphasized that her knowledge and courage had given the security services precious time to respond appropriately. The audience lasted over an hour, much longer than the formal 15 minutes that had been scheduled. The royal family seemed genuinely interested in Emma and her family, asking about their lives in the village, Emma's interests and hobbies, her plans for the future. They spoke about the importance of education and awareness, about how ordinary citizens could contribute to public safety. Before the Harrison family departed, they were presented with gifts. Emma received a personally signed photograph of the royal family, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed in gold, and a collection of historical books about the monarchy, including several rare volumes from the palace library. Her parents and Tommy also received thoughtful gifts commemorating the occasion. But the most meaningful moment came at the very end, when the senior royal present knelt down to Emma's level, much as the police officers and Commander Reynolds had done. Looking directly into Emma's eyes, the royal spoke about courage, explaining that true courage wasn't about not being afraid, but about doing the right thing despite fear. They told Emma that she had demonstrated exactly that kind of courage, and that she should be proud of herself. Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness and respect she had been shown. She thanked the royal family sincerely, her voice small but clear. As they left the palace, Emma held her mother's hand tightly, trying to process everything that had happened. The drive home was quiet, each family member lost in their own thoughts about the extraordinary experience they had just had. Emma looked out the window at the countryside passing by, thinking about how much her life had changed since that day at the parade. She thought about the man who had been arrested, hoping he was getting the help he needed. She thought about Sergeant Mitchell and Commander Reynolds and all the people who worked to keep others safe. In the months that followed, Emma's life gradually returned to normal, though she was forever changed by her experience. The safety awareness program she had inspired was implemented in schools across the country. The emergency signal she had used became more widely known, featured in educational materials and safety courses. Emma was invited to speak at her school and at community events about the importance of awareness and trusting one's instincts. She continued to visit the library every week, still fascinated by history and learning. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, had created a small display about Emma's story, which inspired other children to read about safety and emergency procedures. Emma often helped younger children find books, encouraging them to read widely and learn about many different subjects. Sergeant Mitchell stayed in touch with the family, sending letters occasionally and visiting once when his duties brought him near their village. He told Emma that she had inspired changes in how the Royal Guard trained, with renewed emphasis on recognizing and responding to signals from the public. He said that her actions had reminded everyone in security services why they did their jobs, to protect ordinary people going about their lives. Emma's story became part of the national consciousness, often referenced in discussions about public safety and civic responsibility. But for Emma herself, the most important legacy was simpler. She had learned that one person, even a small 9-year-old girl, could make a difference. She had learned that knowledge combined with awareness and courage could change outcomes. She had learned that doing the right thing, even when it was frightening, was always worth it. Years later, Emma would look back on that day at the parade as the moment that shaped her future. She would go on to study public safety in Secu,